I'm Beth Elliott, and today we're going to be going over how to set up discipline to enter the infraction and action codes, the rooms and staff that are used for discipline, the setting up to indicate who is a special ed student, and then to put in incidents and get the reports out of the discipline system. And we will also be going over the setup and entering of discipline for the teachers in classroom discipline. So to start with, I'm going to go in and set up the infraction and action codes. And you do that under discipline on the left, more discipline editing jobs, and we're going to start with the edit infraction codes. The infraction are what did the student do to get themselves in trouble. The code itself can be up to 4 characters. Your description is, I believe it's 36 characters. It had been shorter. And for those where it was shorter, you have the ability now to expand the description to make it more readable. There are 4 columns to indicate what is included as this type of code. So we can say whether it involves the drug, alcohol, violence, weapons, or bullying. So any one of those, or one or more, can be checked depending on what you have going on. The last column available on web is whether or not this code is available to the teachers in classroom discipline. So if you'd like the code to be available to the teachers, all you need to do is check it, and the teachers will then have access to that code. So things like maybe not the terror threat or the truancy available to the teachers, but tobacco violation, cutting class, left the building or class without permission, those are things that you can add and give to the teachers. When you're done, and to add a new code, you're just going to use your yellow plus at the top to put in a code. And wants to know the new code. And as I said, these don't have to be numbers. They can be letters and so on. So if you like SMOK for smoking, you can use that instead of the letters, instead of the numbers. Some states are going to have specific infraction codes and action codes, and your state electronic data reporting will have a list on that. Other states, you will do a mapping of your code to their code, and if you want to set up your codes more toward what theirs are versus yours, that's entirely doable, and it's just a matter of changing the code. If you change the code in the infraction editor, any place that it has been used in that school year, it will come up and ask, do you want to change it? And you can have things like the no infraction. You can have an infraction that doesn't indicate anything if you wanted to be able to show that this student was potentially a victim. So it might have been that they were not the one that was harassing someone else, but they could be the victim of harassment where their locker was damaged and that sort of thing. So it does give you that capability to put some in. Also remember to put in codes that you might need for your civil rights data collection, which is part of the reason you're seeing the racial and disability harassment here if you don't already have them, and you need to report those to the state or to the government. So I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of here. If I want to delete a code, so if I decide I don't want this smoking one, I'm just going to go up to the red X and delete the record. Now, if I try to delete it and it is in use, it's going to tell me that and not allow me to delete it. So I'm going to save and exit out of here with the red diskette, and I'm going to go back under discipline, more discipline editing jobs, and this time I'm going to edit the action codes. The action codes are the consequences. You can have as many codes as you want. It is a 4-character field, letters, numbers, and the underline, with a 36-character description that goes with it. Whether you have, as you see here, separate codes for how many demerits the student received versus one code that just says demerits is your choice. If you want to know how many times a 5 demerit action was given versus a 10 demerit action, then you want it as separate codes. If you just want to know how many demerits does the student have, I would do one code. and then put in the units as you go. If you scroll down, you're going to be seeing other things that are going on. Now, some of them could be like the detention or the in or out of school suspension. Now, for some of these, you can set the default units. You can also set the auto-assigned daily code. And you'll notice that those codes are set up for my suspensions, either my suspended out of school or suspended in school. And what this does is when we assign this action to the students in the discipline editor, it's going to ask us, do we want to assign the attendance at the same time? And this just saves you a step later of having to go in and put it in. As with the infractions, the actions have flags that we can set of whether it's an in or out of school suspension, were they removed to an alternate ed, or was there an expulsion. There is a default status of opened or closed, and that means that when I assign this action to the student, is it already closed or is it left open? The advantage of using that is you might have a student who comes to you and says, okay, what do I still owe? You know, so how many detentions or in-school suspensions or that sort of thing, what does they still owe? And by having things that are flagged as open, it gives you that ability to go check on that. The available for web is what actions are available for the teachers to assign on classroom discipline. Now, there don't have to be any, in which case you don't check any, or you can decide that there are certain ones that you're going to give the teachers. So it might be whether they phoned the parent or guardian. It might even be that the teacher phoned the parent. And you can say, I want to give that to the available. I want to see that there was no answer or left a message. Things like that of who has, you know, what's going on. And you can also, there might be a teacher detention versus a school detention. So that's something you can put in there. The demerits or the warning might be things that you're going to give the teachers the ability to do. Now, our units can be both positive and negative numbers. So you have the ability to deduct demerits or select them as merits instead of demerits. And that's entirely what you need to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of here. Actually, if I wanted to add an action, it's just the yellow plus. And I might want to double check what was the last code used. So maybe I have an 87 that I want to put in here because I might want to put some other type of remove to alternate ed or something else. And you would just use your yellow plus, add a new code, click OK, and put in a description. So the same as we did under the infractions, we're going to do under the actions. Assign a discipline infraction to a student or create an incident. You need to identify where that infraction occurred. And you do that under school, edit rooms. And in the rooms, it's up to a 6-character code for the room, and you can add a description. Some of these are just straight classrooms, and I can scroll down, and then I can see, oh, I might have a school-sponsored event. The room went from 4 characters to 6, so I have room to put in the T for event. It could be at a ball game. It could be in the hallway, the parking lot, some other location. Because I changed the description of this room, I can hit the Save button. And if it was used anywhere, it would have asked me I want to change it. But I can come in and add any sort of location I want. And that's just a yellow plus and put in what it is. So it might be that it was at the elementary school. So it depends on where I want to specify that it occurred. And depending on what this is, I have the option to omit it from scheduling because it might be a location like the parking lot or the hallway, the game or the school-sponsored event, that those items are never going to be used for scheduling, and they're only going to be, among other places, in discipline. So it gives me that capability. The same yellow plus to add, red X to delete. And if I want to get a report of those, I just hit the printer button. And it's going to let me print those either by the code or the description. And I can include information that is for scheduling purposes. So I'm just going to uncheck those and say I really just want a list of the rooms, and I'm going to print. So now I have a list of the codes and any descriptions that go with it. Nice, easy list if I needed it. So I'm going to save and exit out of here with the door. Actually, I'm just going to close the preview and be able to go from there. So I'm going to save out of here. Staff can report discipline infractions, and those you're going to find under School, Edit Staff Basic, or Edit Staff Expanded. And in here, you could add someone, so you could add a code, which is up to 16 characters. You can add a display name. The code and the display name both have to be unique. The other information does not, but those two do have to be unique. And this is part of how we set up for our teachers. So if you want to be, if you have a disciplinarian, one or two, a housemaster, things like that, then you can add those people into the schedule, into the staff table, and even indicate that they are non-instructional staff, so that you can say, okay, they're there for reporting purposes. I'm not going to assign them to any classes. And some of the people that you're going to have in here, you will also have in for your state reporting options. But this gives us a way to be able to put them in. I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of here. Depending on the system that you're using, if I go into the little bio button, which is the student biographical editor, then there is a way to indicate which students are special ed. If I go to define tabs, I have a tab set up that this user cannot access because they were set up to not have access to the special ed field. But for those that do have access to that, they can flag who is a special ed student and who is not. So if I change the user I'm currently in as staff, I can go to File, Log Out, Log In, come in as a different user. And when I open the database and go to that particular editor again, that tab is now going to be active. And those tabs are set up specific based on the user. Some of them, like this one, are read-only, so they can look at the information but not change it. Others, as we saw before, the special ed tab was inactive. So it was disabled and that particular user could not go in. But there is a field for special ed where it can be set up yes, no, might be exited less than 2 years, depends on the state, depends on what those values are going to be. We also have an additional field here for the special ed program. So I have here where they are learning support or hearing impaired. And that's just a user-defined field that has been created. By having these, when I save and exit out of here, there is a setup in the database configuration. So under Admin, I can go to my database configuration. And there is a Special Ed tab that gives me the ability to specify which field, in this case SPED code, and what value indicates that a student is special ed. You can use whatever biographical field you want to do that and one or more values. I included that optional special ed program. It might be a primary disability, it can be whatever you want here. But part of the reason I'm in here is if I have indicated who the special ed students are, that I can display an alert when I'm in the student discipline editor. And the reason you do that is that there are some students that their actions are limited by what their individual education plan specifies, or a behavior plan. So we want to be able to specify and show who those students are. You can also highlight the special ed student names in the web applications for attendance, skills, gradebook, or discipline for the teachers. So it gives you that option. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I can go into my user accounts under Admin User Accounts. And if I select a user, I can come over to the editors and specify whether or not they can view that special ed alert. So that's going to be on an individual basis for each user, whether they can see it or not, if they are a regular user and not a teacher. In my user-defined tabs, this is where I can specify that I want to disable the special ed field, that tab for the user. What happened is that we set up a specific user based on all the normal, I had a template that I could apply, and if I went to special ed, I could see the fields and the descriptions that go with that. So it gives me that option to be able to come in and say what they have access to. But under the editor, that's where I can specify that they have access to the special ed alert. If they are a teacher, when I set up the teachers, and I can do that in a template rather than overall, when I go to the staff tab, there's a couple of questions at the bottom for the teachers. And one is, has the teacher access to the classroom discipline? If you specify yes, then there is an additional question that says, can the teacher see infractions reported by all teachers or staff for the classroom? If you do not check that, the teacher will only see the discipline infractions that they themselves have entered and not anyone else's. So it's something to think on do you want that additional item that they can see everything that's going on? And that can sometimes come down to confidentiality of how much is that information going to be disseminated among the teachers. So I'm going to exit out and come back in as staff. In here, when we open the database, we're going to start by entering a discipline incident. If I go under discipline, more discipline editing jobs, I can edit an incident. An incident is something that happened that usually that can involve multiple people, or depending on the state, anything they want an incident for anything that has an action of an in or out of school suspension, alternate ed, or expulsion. This infraction that's sitting here, this fight, is you would create an incident number by doing an add. It's up to 8 characters. You can suggest the next number or just type in what you want. Click OK, and then you can start filling the information in. There is a description as to what it is. It is not coming from our infraction table because the incident might have more than one item going on. There might have been a fight, but that fight might also have been related to something. So that's why we don't have it straight from the infraction table. There is the date the infraction occurred, the time, and you can right-click in there to put in a time. And then you can specify AM or PM. If you right-click to put in the time is in as a 24-hour clock. So if it is 1:21 in the afternoon, then you would want it would come in as 13:21, and you have the option to change it. The location is coming from the room table, so you can see where I added in the elementary school and so on. In this case, it's in the parking lot. You can then specify how many offenders you have and what type. Are they student, non-student, or unknown offenders? And then you can indicate how many victims. And again, are the victims student, school personnel, or non-school personnel? And are they unknown? And you can have as many of those as you want. And part of this is just, what's the number? How many do I have? If you do indicate victims, you have an option to go into the Victim tab and to add in a victim. If you have a multi-school database, you have the option at the bottom to include victims from all schools. So if you had a common campus, then there might have been an incident where with that fight was because somebody at the high school was picking on somebody from the middle or elementary school, and there was an objection to that. So then you can go in, when you click Add Student Victims, you will get from all of the schools, not just the high school. because I'm in the high school at the moment. So I'd be able to pick a student from another school and then click OK. You can also include your staff as victims. So if there has been an assault on a staff member, a teacher or administrator, then you can pick from the staff table and be able to bring it from there. And again, you can go across all your schools, or if you uncheck the include victims from all schools, you will only have the staff from your own school. And it gives you the ability to come in and check who was a victim within that fight. And you can check more than one person. So it gives you the option to be able to put those in. The victim ID is going to be their MMS ID number, whether it is a student ID or a staff ID. If you're coming from, say, Pennsylvania, then there is the ability to have a non-staff or student victim, and you would be able to pull from that table. In any case, there is an ability to show whether they were referred to an assistance program, and a lot of this is just the yes, no. You can indicate injury severity. Did they receive medical treatment? And if they did receive medical treatment, then there is a medical treatment note that you can put in to say what they received. You know, was it a bandage? Were they sent to the hospital? Depending on the severity, that's up to you how you want to put that in. If I come back to my incident details, as I continue right, you also can check whether this particular incident involved the drug, alcohol, violence, weapon, or bullying. And then you can put in an incident note. The parents don't have an option to be able to see the incident note. So your incident note might actually name names of who was involved and what was going on, where when we get into the infraction, you might want to be specifying, say, that it was a 9th grade girl or boy, as the case may be, rather than the actual name of the person. Where in here you might want to put that in. Do remember that all of the notes that are in MMS Generations and the web portals are school data, and they can be subpoenaed and go to court. So you want to keep your notes very professional because of that possibility. At this point, I can print what's here. When I view my incidents, by the way, the default is I'm going to view them in incident ID order, but I do have the option to view them in date order instead, and that's just changing the view at the bottom. If I want to print these incidents, I can go to the printer button and go ahead and print what's here. And again, I can do all of them. I can specify which ones of the sub-items do I want. I can highlight which I want, and I can also do a date range. When I print, you have the option of whether to include the incident note, the associated student infraction and action records, start a new page, and include the victims. So I'm going to do most of those and even start a new page. Your output option gives you the option to preview to screen, go straight to the printer, go to a text file, go to a PDF or Excel. And if you're going to a PDF or Excel, you then have the option to change the path of where it's going. But I'm going to leave it preview to screen and click OK and then print. In here, it's going to show you the information of what's going on. So this is a bullying one, and it just gives numbers because we really didn't have anything else associated with it. And when I get into the fight, I can see that I have other numbers. It's letting me know who was the victims, S for student, T for teacher. It gives who were the 3 people, the student offenders who were involved. I can see were they given the same infraction and were they given the same action. There might be reasons why that changes depending on who stepped in to help someone else. But it still gives you the ability to see what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and close out and close out of here. I can go into this little DIS, which is the Student Discipline Editor, or I can go in under Discipline and select the top item, which is the Edit Student Discipline Records. Both of those bring you into this screen. Now in this case, Amy is a special ed student, which is why I have an alert. If I click on that alert, I'll be able to see that what code it was that specified that she was a special ed student and any additional information that I specified. So there's the LS to show me she's a learning support. Close the X in the corner to make it go away. The discipline activity is always going to show it to me in date order so I can see what's going on. As I scroll up, I can see the different items. If there is an incident, I can now specify what incident I am associating with this particular infraction. I can see that there was a date that was fighting. Now, by default, I'm going to see these infractions in code order. If I right-click on the heading, so if I just click here first, I'm going to see that it's in code order, and I might not know all my codes. But what I can do instead is I can right-click on the heading, and I can flip it so it's by description. So now I don't have to know the code, I just have to know the description that I want to work with. The involves is whether it's drug, alcohol for the D, violence for V, W for weapon, or B for bullying. And the system will automatically pick that or show it to you based on the code that you specified. The staff is who reported it. If this was done through the teacher portal, then their teacher name is automatically here. Otherwise, you can add that in from the drop-down. Now again, by default, the list is by the staff code, and your school determines whether that is letters or numbers or a combination. I can right-click on the heading and do it by name, and now I'm going to be going after the display name. So it gives me where I can go either way. As I come across, I can see the location of where that infraction occurred. If I associated the incident with it, then it will automatically fill in the location. I'm going to just right-click a little bit and the time. So it gives me that option. Next up, I have a place where I can indicate the weapon type. And this is part of the valid data selection for the weapon type. And I can come in under Admin Valid Data Selection Table Editor in order to put those in. You might also have the option, if I select the blank line at the top, that I can then add another item in here. It is a 3-character code, but it gives me the ability to put one in and indicate what sort of weapon was involved with the fighting. And I might need different codes depending on the state to say whether there was a weapon involved or not, and what kind of weapon. You know, was it a knife? Was it a gun? If it was a gun, what kind of gun? That sort of thing. So I'm going to continue scrolling right. There is a drug alcohol code that, depending on what was involved, I can indicate what sort of drug alcohol was involved. And again, that is a valid data selection. A lot of times when you see the drop-downs, that's what it is. There is an overall note that has to do with this fight that you can put in for the student to say what's going on. That note will grow as big as you need. The physical limit per note is 1 gigabyte, which is basically the text of War and Peace. So don't worry about running out of room. Beyond that is an extended description. The note I cannot put in a mail merge letter, but the extended description I can. So if I wanted to add that little extra of it was an English book for the text not covered, that's perfectly allowable. That extended description is 100 characters. So I can put, a small paragraph in there. When I'm adding an infraction, I use the Add button on the right-hand side. You'll see that the ones at the top of the screen are disabled because we need to know, are you adding an infraction or an action? The same with the delete. The actions at the bottom of this screen are always going to be associated with the infraction that you have highlighted at the top. So if I go up to the tobacco violation, I can see that Amy got 5 demerits and a detention. If I went to the text not covered, she just got a warning, but then when she had the fight, she had an out-of-school suspension. For each of the actions, there is a starting and ending date. When you set the starting date, it automatically sets the ending date to the same, but you have the option to change that. You can pick your actions either by the code or by the description. So it just depends on which way you want to work with it. Now with here, because I reselected it, it wants to know, do I want to add the daily code of SUO into the table for this particular student? I'm going to say no because I probably already did it, but I have that option. I can again click on the heading to change it by the description to make it easier for me to pick. And then the flag is whether it's out of school, in school suspensions, expulsion, or removed to alternate ed. Because it was an out of school suspension, the status is closed, but it might have been open. Also the fact that it's in the past, so I might have gone in and closed that action. I can set the number of units. A lot of schools will use the units of how many days of suspension. And some of the state reports require that they set the number of units. My action, by the way, does not have to be a school day, neither does the infraction for that matter. But at the bottom, there is a question here to include 0 session days in the selected action dates. And that's that if I say gave a student a couple of days detention that went from a Friday to a Monday, do I want to include the Saturday and Sunday, which are usually non-school days or 0 session days? And that's why that question is here. You also might have a specific code that indicates that there is a Saturday school or Saturday detention, and that you would need to include the 0 session days for that. If I am doing a multi-day action, I have the option to record separate entries for each date. The advantage of that is that I have the ability to close specific dates without closing the entire action. So if I had a 2-day suspension, a Friday to a Monday, or a 2-day detention, I would like both days to be open until each is served individually. So I might want to be able to close the Friday without closing the Monday. So having separate entries gives me that capability. Or if it's one entry, then I might have to hold off till it's the ending date before I close it. As I continue right, there is a place to put in an action note that goes with the particular action that has been assigned to the student. So there might be a note where there was a no-show for detention, or if there was a conference, that I might want to put the results of that conference and that sort of thing in there. The expanded action details gives me a way where I can put some additional information out there. So for something like a suspension or an expulsion, what was the date they were eligible to return to school versus what was the date they actually did return to school? Was law enforcement contacted, which is usually just a yes, no? Was there an arrest, yes or no? What party was taking action? Now, the party taking action is a valid data selection that you can put in different parties. In this case, the ones we're showing is administration, the Board of Ed, court, or some other form. There might be a peer group that is going in. Was alternate ed provided, yes or no? If it was provided, what type? Was there tutoring? Was there homeschooling? What other things? And if it wasn't provided, then why? It might be they were in jail, or some other reason. It might have been turned down because it was offered but then declined. So it gives you the option to put this in. It's just a place to store additional information. As I go further to the right, there is also a place to specify, was this action approved? So if the teachers are entering any of the actions, then depending on the severity level of the action, there can be a place where that is approved, and they can go ahead and put that in. And again, you can right-click and by the name instead of the code. So it just gives you another place to put that in. In between infractions and the action, there's a couple of totals. You can see the totals for the selected infraction that you're sitting on versus the units for all of the actions or all of the infractions. So if I was just doing demerits without indicating the units for the different types of actions, so if I hadn't specified how many out-of-school suspension units, that sort of thing, then that total units could be just my demerits. My discipline statistics give me the ability for the date range that I specified, which is the first day in the calendar to the current date, or for actions I might want to go to the last date in the calendar, because a lot of times my actions are in the future. But for each of the infractions that I have here, it's going to tell me how many times each of those has occurred for this student. If I click once on the occurs, it's going to sort by that in an ascending order. And if I click on it again, it's going to show it in descending order. And this is going to let me see that Amy has been in the office 3 times for tobacco, once for a water gun, talking during announcements, and so on. And as you hover here, it lets you know if you click on the column heading, it'll let you change the order. There is also counts at the bottom that lets you know if for the ones involving victims, how many times they were the victim versus how many times they were an offender with a victim. You can come from here and print a victim report for either case, either when the student was a victim or when they were an offender involving a victim. And that's just, you click there and it brings up the report, and you specify which information you want. Also on the action side, as we did with the infractions, I can click on the occurs, hesitate between the two, so it takes it as a separate item, and then see there has been 3 detentions, sets of 5 demerits. So the 5 demerits occurred twice with a total of 10 units. But I can also see for my out-of-school suspension how many times and what the number of units were for that. So it gives me an area where I can see. Now down here I have a couple of more demerits that I can work with. One that was a 2 demerit assignment, one that was a 1 demerit assignment. Whether you want just one line that says demerits versus the multiple is what sort of statistics you would like to get out of the system. Besides the discipline notes that are specific to the infraction and action, there is also an overall discipline note for the student. This particular note can be related to discipline, but not any specific infraction or action. So this could specify something that's going on in the student's life, or maybe a medical condition. You know, if there's been a recent death or divorce in the family, things like that, or maybe even a recent marriage in the family where they have combined families together. It all depends, and this is just sort of an overall what's going on. The view history gives you the ability to see the overall history for the date range of what's going on with the student. So you'll be able to see the infraction, and then indented are the actions that go with it. If there is a note, it'll just say yes under the note, and the 2 notes here is one is for the infraction and one is for the action. So you can see what's going on. So it's just a quick way to what's what for the student. If you have set up to do a mail merge for discipline, you can actually come over here and print that mail merge for the student. It'll let you know which settings have been set up, so you can see the name of your infraction or the mail merge table, what master document you're going to work with, and if there was a form. So if I go back to the discipline activity and I add in an infraction for today, It might be that the student was involved with some soda or snack violation. So they had food where they didn't need it. I can indicate just by tabbing over which teacher. I can use a space bar to drop the list and then come in and say who reported it, say what room it was in, the time it occurred. So it might have been at 9:23 in the morning. There wasn't any weapons. I don't have to put any sort of note with that. I can come down and add the actions of what went with it. And because this is not the first time they've been having stuff go on, I might decide that there is a detention. So I can just do a DET to get to my detention and specify what's going on. And I can use my stack of folders here to go select someone else who might have also had something going on. And I don't have to type the complete name. I can just put in part of it. And whatever I type in is going to show up at the top so I can see what's going on, or I can come up and down with arrows and then select a student. Now, Joe here hasn't had anything else going on up till now, but he's up to something where he was back talking. And I can, again, because I've tabbed over, when I tab out of that, it lets me come in, see what's going on here. And it was in there. It was 10:10 this morning. And I can work from there. And then I can come down, add the action. They also got detention. And I can see other information that I want to put in there. And it might have been a really severe case of back talk, so maybe I want to put both 2 days and go up to Monday and give them a couple of days of detention. So it allows me to put that in. And I can just save and exit when I get out. Now at this point, if I was doing the mail merge, it knows the student I'm sitting on. This is one of the few occasions where my output option by default is straight to the printer, because the intent here is to help cut down on how long it takes me to get something occurred, get something out. So I could then just go ahead and preview, and it would give me the ability to see the current date, who it went to for the parents, letting them know there was a back talk with detention, and I can add other information. Now, that action taken could also include the dates of the starting and ending date that goes with that action. But I might want to change my letter in order to do that. But it does give me the ability to put that out. This can be set up so that there is a signature line. So if I had the situation where I might have 3 housemasters that each handle their own area of discipline, this would give me the ability to put in the name and a description so that when I print the letter, I only have to have 1 letter to be able to do that. And then there's an optional note that can also go in there, so maybe with a little bit more detail for what was going on. You can flag any student whose letter is printed so that they can do that. And if you do that, then they want a tracking number. So I might want to know how many times have I sent a letter to the parent saying that their student has been in trouble. Gives that option if you want. But that's basically your student discipline editor. Now, if I'm a teacher, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the teacher area of this. This is discipline. And if I come in here, it's going to bring up all of the students. The default is to show all students, in which case I can scroll up and down and see the entire student body. Or I can opt to show students from the class selected in the toolbar above. So it might depend on, did the infraction occur in my class versus it occurred somewhere else. And it might be that for Alicia Glunk here, that I can highlight the student and she doesn't have any infractions at this time. But I can come down to the bottom and add one in saying what was going on. So I'm going to come in and her text wasn't covered in geometry. So I can go ahead and add that infraction in to this student. Now, if I want to see her profile, if I needed to contact the parents or anything, I could click on that. And I would now be able to see what Alicia looks like, her parents. If there was an email address, it would be under the contact name. And I might also have phone numbers and such to work with. With the infraction, I can now scroll down, see the date of the infraction I specified. Now the date and who reported it is filled in because it's the current date, and the reported by is who I am as a teacher being logged in. I can come in and specify the room that it occurred in, and I can set up the time that it occurred. Now, if I want to, I can click the little clock, and that will fill the time in for me. And if I want, I can indicate what book wasn't covered. And I can go ahead and save this. If I scroll back up, and if they have been given the ability to put things in, I might be giving them a warning. But if there are actions available, then I can specify and I can add those actions in. And you can set up a starting and ending date, what the action is, the units if need be, and set open or close and put in a note. And on both notes, you have the ability to spell check. You can save that. And there's also down here the ability to print a slip that lets them do an infraction slip. So what that's going to show me is what was the infraction and what were the actions that went with it, if there were any associated. So there I can see that the text wasn't covered. There was a warning and what the dates are. It has the student name and their ID, who the teacher was, when the infraction occurred. As I scroll down, if they have been set up, you have signature lines for the parent, student, teacher, and principal. And they can just go right to the printer to print that. So it gives an option that you have to be able to work with that. If I go back up to my list of users, and right here, just at the top, because I'm still working on Alicia, I can see here was today's infraction, what her infraction description was, the reporting teacher, the action and units, and so on. If I click on a different student, I'm going to see their information. Now at this point, Amy has her name in red, which was a way to indicate that she was a special ed student. She also has a little apple that allows me to click on to see what sort of special ed alert she has. So it's just a different way to see that information. There are 9 year-to-date infractions for Amy, totaling 14 units. Because this teacher was allowed to see what others haven't reported, I'm seeing the other things that are involved. So the squirt gun and the snack and the talking during announcements was not Mr. Hobble, but it was others who reported them. But it lets me see what's going on. If I want more detail, I can click the select, and I'll be able to come down here and see the information, but also have it flagged that it is read only. And that is because this was not the teacher who reported it. If I click an infraction that this teacher did report, then they have the option to potentially add in more actions or put in the notes because it's that teacher, they can modify what's there. So you do have that capability. There's one other thing before I log out as the teacher, and that's under attendance under the view. If you have saved a setting for the student discipline report, you can actually have it where the teacher can print all of the history for each student. And then you just click view and they would be able to see an entire history for that student. The shade is for each infraction, whether there is one action or multiples. It lets them see what's going on with it. I'm going to go ahead and log out of this teacher and come in as the administrator or as an administrator. In the admin portal, whether I am in as administrator or some other user that has full administrator privileges, one of your tabs is discipline, where you can do the initial setup values. In this setup values is where for the school you set up what is the maximum number of actions the teacher may assign for each student infraction. It's 1, 2, 3 or unlimited. It could also be 0 if you had not set any of the actions to be available for the web. This is where you specify which signature lines you want on your report and how far back the teachers may delete infractions that they have reported. And it's only the infractions that they have put in. So is it the current date, today and the day before, or any date? And the default is the current date only. So that allows you to say, okay, they can change today, they can change today and maybe yesterday, or they can do anything, but that's up to you as to how far back you want to allow them. The last part of this has to do with email notifications. You can set the system up to automatically notify up to 4 different people or 4 different email addresses based on either who the teacher is or the student's year of grad. Some schools set up an email address that is just discipline at their school address so that anyone who has access to that, say we have different housemasters, would be able to go in and cover for someone else. And they all go to the same place. That way you don't get inundated and it doesn't get lost in what you're doing. But you can specify who you want to work with. And in here, all I would need to do is if I had different addresses, is I could change who I want to work with. And it might be the seniors and juniors are going to this user, and the sophists and freshmen are going to these, or it could be that I want to do my shift and take them all to both. So, and I can use a shift key, a control key to do a toggle in between if I want. But it gives me that option that I can see what's going on. And when I'm done, I scroll up to the top and hit the Save button. But that's how you can indicate how the classroom discipline is set up for the teachers. Now that we have it set up, and in any of this, you could always have gone to Help to get further information. I'm going to go ahead and close this out and go back into Generations to look at the rest of my reports. I'm going to go ahead and save and exit out of the students. Under Discipline, I have a couple of reports that I can do right here. I have a student report by action. So I might want to go in and say, okay, who has detention tonight? And so I'm going to come in and select my actions and go in and select the code that indicates detention, and I can select more than one. If I select more than one, I can indicate an and or an or between them. An or says that any of the ones I select with their parameters puts the student on the report, where an and says everything has to be valid. My minimum occurrences are going to be 1 by default. I don't normally set units, but I could. And the status criterion is going to be opened or closed, open only or closed only. So maybe I want to pull a report of only those items that are still open. And I have the ability to do that. If I change one of these, I can update the actions that are highlighted by clicking this button. And I can opt that I want to go to the same date, starting and ending. Now I can either click here and type my date in, or I can click on the little 2-day calendar and go forward and back, so I'm able to select the date that I'm working with. If I just go ahead and hit print, I'm going to be able to see a list of what's going on for each piece of information. So here are the two actions that are associated with 2 students that have detention tonight. So it gives me that option. Now you can also include the action details if you so choose, and you can put in here the action and the date. So instead of having, say, 3 lines per student, we're now going to have 1 heading and which students have it. This is nice because I don't need to know why they're in here. I just need to know who is in here. So it makes it nice. You can also, if you're selecting more than 1 action, or without that, you can limit by the total number of actions, saying, okay, show me only students that have more than or equal to, say, 3 actions of whatever kind that I'm specifying. Actually, it doesn't matter. It's whatever ones I want to see in here. So maybe I want to cover all 3 of those. And when I print, it's only those students that have 3 or more within the date range that I specify. And I'm going to go back to the beginning of school through today and let it run. So here I have how many are detention, how many are suspension. So Amy is the only person with 3 or more actions to start with being on that list. So the other student, because they'd only had the 1 action, are not on here. So it lets me limit based on the number of actions or how many infractions. Now, right now, this was set up to print totals only. If I uncheck that, I have the option to include my expanded action details or the infraction details. You can save as many different reports as you want, and maybe use that to be able to come back out and say what's going on. Sometimes what you're looking for in here can be, you know, am I doing a fighting letter versus I'm going to be working with who's on the detention list. You can limit based on the type of actions that are represented, and it gives you the option how much of that you want to see. Remember on your actions, depending on what you're looking for. So if you were looking for a student who wanted to know, let me see everything that is still open. So I want to come down, select all of it, and say open only. I want to update everything so it's only what's open. And I'm going to come through and say, oh, just give me totals, you know, what's open. And I might need to go to the future for that, because there could be things coming up. And I can go ahead and print, and then for the student, I have the option to start a new page for each student. To take it off 3 or more actions. So it means open detention. There's Bradford's open detention, Brandon, and so on. So it lets me see what's going on of the things that are still open. And if I didn't do that, if I just gave totals only, I'm not going to start a new page this time. I can go back and print, and then for each student, it would show me what is still open and what dates do they occur on. So it lets me see what's coming up. Now I can come in under discipline If I was just looking at my actions, I can come on under operations, and I want to close my opened actions. So if I was looking for today and my detention list, pull a different date. So here I have a date that has my actions. If I double click on the first one, it's going to close it and automatically bring me down to the next one. And if I hit my enter key, it's going to close it. And it allows me to toggle between. So I can come in and see who actually showed up for detention versus who needs to be changed. I don't have to know the infraction date in order to do this. I don't have to go to the specific infraction for the student. I just have to know what was the action that they were in for. So it makes a nice, quick way for me to be able to go in and see what's going on. Now, other reports I can run. Under discipline, I did a report by action. I can also do a report by infraction. So when I come in here, I can do a date range. I can limit by the number of infractions. If I have not chosen any infractions yet, my print button isn't active because I haven't said what to print. And it gives me a little note here that says, oh, I need to go select infractions before I can do anything. And I can come in and look at how many times have they had what. I can set a minimum number of occurrences. If I up that number, I can update the infractions. I can clear them to start over. And I can say and or between all of these. So I can go ahead and look, and I can opt to print totals only, whether I want to include the action details. Do I want to include the victims? That's entirely up to you how much of this you want to choose. And by default, it's going to skip students with 0 infractions. And when we're on the action side, it also skips students with 0 actions. So if I go back and print, it's going to run through and show me the students that have infractions for the date range I specified. I don't have a lot of history out there, so it doesn't take too long. So there's my infraction with what sort of actions go with it, who the teacher was, and so on. This was for each action for Amy. Here's the infraction and the times it occurred. So I can see what's going on, and then I go to the next student and see what's going on with them. If there is an associated incident, it's going to give me that information. I can have a weapon code or a drug alcohol code. That is not district of attorney code, it's drug alcohol. So it lets me see the information that I'm working on. So just how do I want to look at the data? I can look at this by student, and I can also, under discipline, more reports. I can go in and look at this based on the staff. So I can see how often which staff member is reporting what. So I can select my infractions. I can also do it on actions. So the same sort of selection. And I can print. Now, if I'm doing it by the staff, then for each staff member, it's going to show me who is, what are they reporting. Now, some staff members might be reporting some things more than others. So there's 3 occurrences of fighting, 2 of tobacco violation, and so on. So it lets me see what's going on. Now, in this case, I am including the details. I could opt that instead of including details, I just want to see totals. I can also say, show it to me by the infraction rather than, and then the staff. So now when I print, it's going to show me for each of the actions, or infractions rather, who reported it. So I had 2 different people reporting text not covered, and so on. This can be handy because it might show me that for a particular item, I have one user, one reporting person that has a higher number of incidences than the other. So it might be a way to indicate that that particular staff member needs some instruction on how to handle stuff that's going on in the classroom versus knowing that they're hired because they're the disciplinarian. Gives you a way to see what's going on. And any of these, there's a save setting that you can do. Also under discipline is the student record listing. And this is where you can come in and say, I want to see that detail. For teacher portal is I can recall and save one setting. So it's just going to include the extended infraction description, but not the expanded action details or any of the notes. So this was similar to what they saw under the attendance view, the discipline student record listing. Now I can save more than one setting if I am not saving for the teacher portal. So if I go ahead and select Amy, I can say include my infraction note, my action note, the extended description. Students who are inactive for discipline, normally you're only going to print if the student is active for that particular module. So this gives you the way in the student listing to say print them anyway. Start a new page, include the other areas as you want. Now this student's discipline note is the overall note versus the incident. So it gets me different areas I can look at. So I can go ahead and print and see the full information of what's going on based on what I checked. So it gives me options to see. If I have that overall discipline note, I can come in under discipline, more reports, and print the student discipline notes report. This is set up to include students with no notes, in which case I get everyone, about an inch per student on the page. Or if I say no to print students with no notes, I'm only going to get those that have an overall note. That was that separate tab in the editor that I can work with. And if I do this, as I said, it's about an inch per student, so I have a place where I can scribble in and see what's going on. The order of the students in this report is entirely based on the order in the filter. Other reports I can run for the students under discipline, more discipline reports, is a historical summary. What the historical summary does is it gives me the ability, without changing school year, to go back as many years as I want. In this case, I have 4 years of information, so it allows me to go back that far. I can include yearly totals, grand totals, or just print the totals. And I'm going to make it easy. I'm just going to do Amy here. Actually, let's do Amy and her sister. So when I print, it's going to go back through all the years. This is a landscape report, but it's going to show me for however many years back I need to go to what she has for detail. So there's an infraction side and an action side. I can see what's going on with the different flags. I can see the totals for each year. And then I can go to the next page if I had one for another student. So rather than just showing the current year, it allows me to see a historical look of what's going on for that student, which can be very handy depending on what it is. Opposite of that is another report that's a summary report under discipline, more reports, is the statistical summary. Now the statistical summary is the current year only, and I can come in and say I want to pick just a couple of items here, so just let's take those two. And I can see the totals by month, by year of grad, or by gender, or all three or two, however many of these I want. I do have to click at least one. So if I print, it's going to run through for the date range and show me how many times and in what month those are occurring. So I had 3 fights and 3 tobacco violations. If I include year of grad, then within the month, I'm going to see by year of grad who's occurring. So the tobacco violation is all in the class of 2017, but the fighting is between 2017 and 2018. Now, an incident earlier we were saying was 1 item. Now, I happen to know that these 3 for the fighting was all the same fight. So it was 1 incident, but 3 infractions. So that's where sometimes I'm looking for what occurred and who was involved. I can look at actions in here instead of infractions. So I can come in and see when are the suspensions or the detentions taking effect. And I might want to, rather than by month, I just might want to do it by gender. So I can pick one of those without the other and see what's going on, male or female. So I had more females in detention and more males in suspension. So I can just see what's going on. And you can also look based on the incidents and do totals by month if you so choose. So I can find out what month are the infractions occurring, how many in August, how many in September, and so on. So it gives me that ability to see what's going on and how many involve the drug, alcohol, weapons, and bullying. So based on the totals, the check marks that I've done, what else do I have? So it's just a way to get some information out, depending on what you're working. If I want to create a mail merge letter, and actually before I do that, when I was in discipline, more edits, the one edit I didn't cover was editing the calendar. Most of the time that is covered under attendance, but I can come in here if I need to, add in a calendar identification code, auto-edit my calendar days to give it a date range, and then be able to come in and indicate whether they are school days or teacher workshop or holidays or what have you. But I need at least 1 calendar and the student assigned to a calendar in order to put in discipline. So just to cover that real quick. Other reports that I have in here, we did the 2 staff. We did one, I didn't really cover the 1 by action, but it's similar to the student 1 by action. The infraction one is more, I can specifically go to the incident report that I hit with the printer button when I was in the incident editor. We did the notes. There is a victim report that was similar to the one at the bottom of the student listing when I was looking at the statistics. It gave me the information for the rest of it, but now I have a student range, or when I came from the editor, it knew what student I was on. So it gave options for those. The other reports have to do with the setup for the different areas that I'm working with. The operations, we worked with the open and close any of the opened actions, and now we're going to come into discipline mail merge. There is also an option to do a discipline telephone messaging. So you could have it that for students that have an after-school detention, you could have an automatic phone call be put out to go to the parents to let them know that their student are going to be on the late bus because they had a detention. But the mail merge is where I can set up to produce letters. So when I come in here, there are 2 places I can do letters from. I can do it based on their infraction or based on the action. So in effect, am I doing a fighting letter or am I doing a detention or suspension letter? I'm going to leave it on the infraction side, but I can do it to either one. I can set up one of these once I have all of my tabs set up. I can set up a default for the editor, recall those settings so it knows what fields to use and what master document and report form. And that's how it sets up for what I'm going to do when I do the information for the student editor. But in the meantime, when I'm creating this, you can pick what fields you want, whether it's year of grad, grade level, contact address information, whatever information you need for your letter. And that can include the student name. So last name, first name, that sort of information so that it is in the letter. So it gives you that option. If I'm doing either the infraction or action letter, I can specify the maximum number of infractions I'm going to include in the letter and how many actions per infraction. When you're setting this up, you can include your action details. You don't have to. You can just say the student has been reported for these items and leave it at that. And at the bottom, you can specify if I am bringing in contact information, which contact do I want to pull from? Do I want to pull just from the primary contact one? Or do I want to do it from the mailing flag where any of my contacts are set yes for mail? The advantage of a mailing flag is I can do for both the custodial and non-custodial parents in one run. So that gives me that capability. I'm going to leave it on the parent at this point, just the one contact. And I'm going to go ahead and go into build the table. When I go to build the table, that brings me into the report by infraction. If I have any settings, I can recall them. So there can be a set that is specific for the editor. And I can come in and here it said select everything. If I had added new codes, I would need to add them in order to include them versus the no infraction. When you're doing this, you can set your date range, small or large as the case may be, and you can do a report in addition to building the mail merge table. So do I want to see the information besides building that table I'm going to use for the merge? I'm going to cut this down just to make it faster. So I'm going to let it build, show me who's out there. It created the file, and now it's going to show me the report of those students on that report. So it lets me see what's going on. Amy's had a lot of things she's been up to. So it gives me the option. When I exit, it brings me back into the mail merge, and I can go into the master document. Before I do that, there's the area here where I talked earlier about the house master and so on. This is where I would be able to fill that information in. So when I go into the master document, there are two letters that are set up by default that I can load as defaults that lets me see the information that's here. This C month line gives me the ability to bring in today's date and put it in a prettier format. So instead of seeing 10/25/2015, I'm going to see October, so it says bring me the calendar month or the character month of the current date, give me the day from the middle of that date, and give me a 4-digit year. Below that, I have the ability to bring in the contact name and address, and then I have a dear Mr. and Mrs. Jones. This is to inform you of the student name. And there's things like the IIF is an immediate if statement that I can put in. The exclamation empty says if it's not empty. So if middle name is not empty, I want a space and I want one character from the left side of the middle name, and that's what the left justified does. The right justified would take it from the right side of the field, and the remove leading and trailing spaces is where you see the all trim come in. So just ways to modify my letter. If I go into the question mark, I'm going to bring up help for the mail merge, and it even knows I'm on the master document. If I go to the mail merge tab, it's going to give me information about setting it up and about the two signature lines. The master document lets me see the information of what's here, what the fields are, tips for how I want to work with it. What's nice in here for the biographical fields is it's going to give me sort of a view of what those fields look like in the editor, and it gives me the field name. So I know what sort of information I'm going to bring in, And if I come down to the context, it lets me see the names of the fields there too. At the bottom or coming down, it also lets me see if I was doing a report by infraction. I can click on that particular area and it's going to show me what are the fields I'm bringing in. So the last two digits are the action, or which infraction it is. The first two digits are the action that goes with that infraction. So the 01 and the 01 is the first and the first action. The 04 and the 01 is the fourth action for the first infraction. So it lets me see what I'm working with. And you have similar information when you look at the actions. They're set up a little different, but it's similar to what you're working with. So just remember that that information is there. Below that, it lets you see about the if statements that we were working with. So you can even do things like test for the gender. So if the sex is an F, I want to put her versus his for gender-based pronouns in the letter. So it lets you see what information is there. Parentheses are always paired, open and close, as are the quotes, and the quotes have to be the same kind, single or double, just for information that goes with that. So it lets me see what's here. As I scroll down in this sample letter, I can start seeing the information that's here, where I can bring in the date, the infraction, the teacher, the action, and see what's going on with that. Here are the codes we were talking about earlier. These are the codes versus the description. So I can bring things over. Some of these are set up that I just want the first 20 characters or the first 14 to make sure that everything lines up. What I'm seeing here in this letter is the default uses Arial that I'm seeing here, which is a proportional font, which means that my I is narrower than my T or W. When it prints, it's going to print in Courier. Courier is a non-proportional font, so all of the characters are the same width. So to get things to line up, I might have to count, like to go from this dash to the next dash, as I can do 1, 2, 3. So I can see that there are 3 spaces between the date and the infraction. So if I come down here, I can do 1, 2, 3 and see that I have 3 spaces between the date and the description. So I can modify this letter however I want. Right now, this is set up to include a hard-coded person with their title. If I was bringing in the signature line, then I could bring in my 2 signature lines, 1 and 2, and put those in there instead. So when I built the merge table, I would be able to take whatever is here. My master report form is how I want the letter to look. So I could change the font and maybe put letterhead and that sort of thing in there. When I come over to merge print the letters, this gives me, based on who was in my mail merge table, it allows me to build for all of those students. You can flag any student whose letter is printed, and you can set up a tracking number for that. So it depends on whether I'm doing if I'm just doing different infraction letters, I can have one code. I can have a different one for say a fighting letter if I wanted to do something a little different than a generic letter. You can clear your previously tracked letters. You can print them. You can put in the date that you're sending it out. You can limit the letters to those not yet printed. That applies more, say, if I'm in attendance and I'm doing a 3 absent letter or a 5 absent letter. I might want to track which ones those are, and I don't want to send another one if I've already sent one. So that's where the limit comes in. If I was limiting, I can come over to the merge print labels and say, I want to go with just the contact name. Let me go ahead and print whoever has labels for the letters I'm going to work with. And I can do that before I print my letters. So if I go ahead and print I'm going to be able to see the letter that I have set up. It takes a little bit to bring it up, but there is today's date in a pretty format, the contact address, name and address, the contact name. This lets me know it's for Amy Aviatici. She has different items, so I can see the date that it occurred, the infraction with an indication of whether it was drug, alcohol, or violence, weapons, and so on, who reported it, and then the actions taken by, what the action was that goes with that. So it lets me set those up. And you can have multiple letters. You're not limited to just. Now, to set up some of the valid data selection that we had for things like what type of weapon it was, or the drug, alcohol, I'm going to go in under Admin and go to the Valid Data Selection Table Editor. In here, you can pick the table you're going to work with, and most of your student tables start with an S. So if I was looking for the infraction table, I can then see the kinds of drug, alcohol that are used or what kinds of weapons are used. If I was doing on the action side, I would be able to see the reason alternate ed was not provided versus the type of alternate ed that was provided. And I could, if I want, highlight this and say, oh, tutoring. Go to this one and say it is homeschool and specify what I want to work with. The same can involve for the party taking action. Now, in all of these, you can specify whether you want to allow values to be added for this field from the editor. If you're going to say yes for this, then you need to make sure you have a blank record. So it just gives you the ability to say what's going on. It's just another way to put information out there. So what sort of questions do you have at this point? So the question I have is, how do I know which incidents need a code and which ones are reported to the state? A lot of time to find that information out, if you go to the word help, table of contents. Doesn't want me in the other thing when I do that. I can come in under the contents, and I might go into the state modules, go to my specific modules, and there's usually an area for the implementation where it'll give you some information on what sort of information, like implementing the school safety templates in Pennsylvania, and it's going to give you some information of what you need to do to fill that information in. A lot of times with the states, whether it's Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, take your pick for the different areas. There will be implementation for each of those areas, and then you can come in and see, I'm looking at my safe schools, so there will be other guidelines depending on the state that you're on. But they'll give you what you need. But I would say most of the time your incidents are going to be the ones that include drug out-of-school suspensions, in-school suspensions, expulsions, definitely those three, removal for alternate ed, and also potentially detention and other things. You might also want to create the incidents if it involves more than one person. So something like that fight where I had 3 different people involved for the students. I want to be able to say there was one incident, but 3 students were involved. So it's the state that's going to dictate some of whether you need an incident or not. So it just depends on, what you need to look at. Also remember, I'm going to bring up our editor or our website. So if I go into www.cri-mms.com, even without logging into the account for support, I can look at the video learning library for the tech sites, and I can come in for the knowledge base articles, where I can say I'm looking for something for discipline. I can just type in discipline and hit search. It's going to give me different information I need from my editors. So how to use discipline mail merge in the editor. I can put in potentially for different states what's involved, administrative checklist for a new year that I need to go in and set that up. If I look at one of these items, then you also will get related articles on the side that potentially also have the same keywords that it gives you the ability to go in and look. If I go back to the home, if I have a webinar subscription, then I can come down and go to the full-length videos and be able to look at those. But I would need to be logged in for that. At that point, go to the full-length recorded webinars and be able to see which ones are out here. There are some that are related to the portals. There are some that are related to the specific states. And if you go forward and back through the different areas, you'll be able to see that. And as you continue down, there'll be ones that are related to just general MMS. And what's nice with the portals or with the webinars is you can, as with this, is you can go through it, run it back, run it forward again, fast forward it, gives you an idea of what's going on. If you go in to if I go to my downloads and updates, I can go and select the most current state that I'm working with. And at the bottom of this download area, even if we host you, you can view and download the manual, and that'll give you the most recent changes for what you're working with. So depending on the state, you can just go ahead and go there and grab the manual, and that's going to help for some of what you're looking for. You can always go to the state website and get their most recent information. For the portals, you can go in and see the most recent information there. You can see the release notes. And if you scroll down for the portals, you can go to the documentation, and there is a specific manual in that zip file that is strictly for the teachers versus one for the admin or staff. So that's going to give you the ability to go in and see what's going on for it, which makes it really handy to be able to hand out to different people. So remember, the documentation is here along with everything else. And if I go back to home and I go down to my webinar sign up, I can see which webinars are coming up. Now it looks at a current week. I can look at a month, or I can look at the agenda, which is going to give me just a straight list of everything coming up after that. All of these are different areas where you can go in and get help for what you're doing. We thank you for participating in this webinar and hope to see you at another one.